Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of the one-shot Jadeite. Here's the summary. Shouto is happy dating Awase. Really, he is. And if it feels like there's something missing or lacking, it's only because they haven't been together for very long. It's certainly not because Awase is falling short of a standard set in Shouto's mind, without him consciously putting it there. One that compares everything Awase says and does to Shouto's best friend. Definitely not. Or, Shouto is absolutely not comparing his boyfriend to his best friend. And then he is. And well, that's bad news for his boyfriend. But very good news for his best friend. Being hungry because you haven't eaten for far too long is uncomfortable. Your stomach cramps, nausea rolls through you in waves, and you sway on your feet like a willow branch in a strong wind. It's unpleasant, to say the least. But it's worse. Shouto knows to be hungry, given a meager taste of what you need, what your body craves, and then nothing more. You wish desperately for more food, any food. Your brain remembers the feeling of eating now, of chewing and swallowing, but you only got a single bite. You know just how good it feels to eat, but there's no more food coming your way. You'd eat anything, if it meant filling yourself up all the way. Hell, you'd even chance eating something you're allergic to because satisfaction and satiation has been hinted at far too clearly, and you need. Shouto thinks this is the perfect analogy for his situation, of being deprived of praise and any other positive reinforcement his whole life, and then suddenly getting a taste of what it feels like to be told he's done a good job. Of craving more of that feeling, the way his chest swells with pride and whatever muscle aches he has suddenly feeling worth it because he's accomplished something. So, when Midoriya cracks the protective layers Shouto had built around himself to separate him from his classmates at the sports festival, Shouto suddenly finds himself on the receiving end of more praise than he knows what to do with. It feels so damn good, like the universe is trying to make up for his old man being a withholding asshole Shouto's whole life. Midoriya praises his knowledge, not his quirk, but what he knows. And Yaoyorozu tells him his hair is enviable, and Jiro compliments the lowness of his voice as one of the few that doesn't make her resent her overpowered hearing. It's like cooling aloe vera gel over sunburn, smooth and relieving and generating a content sigh from the back of his throat. When he first gets praise from Awase, it strikes a different chord in Shouto than when anyone else does it. It's just after the first Class A and B joint training exercise, and Awase approaches Shouto, pulling him aside so that no one else can hear as the boy says Shouto did well, with his flames and rising to Tetsutetsu's challenge. Honestly, Shouto didn't think he did his best, so Awase's words are soothing to his injured pride. Growing up under Todoroki Enji has turned him into a perfectionist of the highest order, and since Awase doesn't know him, doesn't have any real motivation or potential to gain by pumping Shouto's ego up, the words wrap themselves around Shouto's heart in an instant. His pulse picks up, thumping through his veins like it's trying to make itself known, and his palms become clammy, even the one on his cold side. There's a warmth in his chest, roughly where his heart is, that he's fairly certain isn't coming from his quirk. A tentative smile slides onto his face as he thanks Awase, and out of the corner of his eye, he sees Midoriya frown in his direction. It makes the warmth in his chest turn cold, not like his eyes, but like the absence of even the potential for heat, a void that seems to be sucking all the good feelings out of him and leaving only frozen nothingness behind. It's not a nice feeling, so Shouto turns away fully, removing Midoriya from his peripheral. If he can't see the frown, he doesn't have to think about the reason it's opened a black hole where his heart should be, right? Roughly 3.5 weeks into dating Awase, Shouto finds himself lying on his futon in his dorm room, staring at the ceiling blankly. It's early in the evening, nowhere near a normal bedtime yet, but he's been avoiding Midoriya as much as he can without arousing suspicion since the frown, so, as far as his classmates are concerned, Shouto has a very early bedtime these days. The thing is, Midoriya hasn't done anything wrong. Shouto just has this increasing sense that he has whenever he's around his best friend. Whenever Midoriya frowns at him, or Awase, whenever he catches those vibrant green eyes looking a little duller and sadder than they normally do, the ice-bitten cavern that opened in his chest during the joint training exercise yawns a little wider and encompasses more of his being, steals more of his happy feelings, and Shouto doesn't want to resent Midoriya, so instead, he avoids him and prevents that cold, empty feeling from spreading as best he can. While Shouto might not know much about being a friend, he does know that what he's doing is probably bad friend etiquette. He'd ask Ida or Uraraka, except they both look at him strangely these days, and Uraraka has made some leading comments about Shouto's relationship with Awase that make him uncomfortable, so he's sort of avoiding them too. All this to say, Shouto is very lonely when he's in the dorms these days. When Sunday comes that week, Shouto heads over to 1B's dormitory building first thing in the morning. He wants to tell Awase about his problem with Midoriya and his other friends and get some advice from someone who no doubt has much more social experience than Shouto himself. A bitter voice in the back of his mind sneers at him. What, like that's hard? There are pets with more social experience than you. He huffs, breath condensing visibly in front of his face. It used to be when that bitter, resentful part of him reared up, he would go and spend time with Midoriya. Shouto never felt hesitant to knock on his best friend's door, even when the chance of him being asleep was fairly high. And then Midoriya would either distract Shouto by talking about something entirely unrelated, a quirk that had caught his eye, a manga he'd been enjoying maybe, or sometimes Shouto would tell Midoriya what his inner voice had to say. Midoriya always knew how to make Shouto feel better, though. He wonders how Midoriya would answer the comment his mind had just made. Lacking one thing doesn't mean you don't have things other people wouldn't. I mean, almost no one in her class started the school year with as much self-confidence as you, Todoroki, and that's really valuable. Just like we'll all develop our self-confidence as we go, you'll gain social experience. If that makes sense. His lips curl faintly at the stutter his imagination injects, making the conjured Midoriya's voice all the more authentic. Midoriya has always known just how to soothe Shouto's worries and rationalize his insecurities into more manageable things. Shouto misses that. Misses Midoriya. But Awase can do those things too. Awase tells Shouto how well he's doing at this and that, praises his achievements, and celebrates his victories with him. It's not like Shouto is without the positive reinforcement he needs. Although, maybe, if he were being completely honest, he'd say that Awase's words don't have quite the same ring of pure, earnest honesty that Midoriya's always do. They don't sound like they're pouring straight from his heart, as they come out of his mouth the way Midoriya's do. Frowning, Shouto stuffs that admission into the deepest recesses of his mind. It's not a big deal. It's probably just because he hasn't known Awase as long as he's known Midoriya. He rationalizes. Once they're more familiar with one another, he's sure Awase will sound just as heartfelt and genuine. Huffing again, as he drags the door to the 1B dormitories open, Shouto shakes his head as if it will shake his thoughts into order that is more conveniently pleasing for him, telling himself that once he sees Awase's face, it will banish the ghosts of Midoriya's expressions that have started to plague him. The smiles he used to be on the receiving end of that he hasn't seen in too long. He gets into the elevator and pushes the button for Awase's floor, flexing his fingers as he waits for the upwards journey to complete, curling them into fists before stretching them as long and straight as they'll go. Hand mobility and strength are vital when you use your quirk the way Shouto does. That's why he's doing it, not because he's nervous. Obviously. Awase Yosetsu. The nameplate beside the bedroom door stares back at Shouto far too knowingly for what amounts to an enlarged sheet of metal with no sentience. Shouto narrows his eyes at it, as if he can glare the thing into submission before grimacing at himself. He's trying to intimidate an inanimate object. Clearly, something isn't right. Maybe Awase can tell him what it is. Yeah, Awase will know what's going on. He raises his fist, and he knocks. Izuku is lounging in the common room at lunchtime when Todoroki reappears, stepping through the front door of their dormitory building with an odd expression on his face. It's not one Izuku's ever seen before, which immediately sets off alarm bells in his mind, but he resists the urge to go and ask his friend what's wrong. Todoroki hasn't wanted his company for almost a month now, and Izuku won't force it on him. He made that mistake with Kachan, and now his first friend in the whole world despises him. No, Izuku won't let that happen with Todoroki. When Todoroki wants to speak to him or spend time with him or goddamn look at him again, he will. Until then, Izuku will just dig his fingernails into his palms and keep his distance. Uraraka's lips pull into a deep-set frown when she catches sight of Todoroki, which at least tells Izuku he isn't imagining things. He almost wants to ask her to go check on him, but Todoroki's been a bit cagey around Uraraka and Ida too, from what they've told him. So he swallows the suggestion and does his best to surreptitiously follow Todoroki with his eyes. He makes his way into the kitchen, and a few minutes later, reemerges with a steaming cup that's presumably filled with the berry-mixed tea he likes, and makes his way into the common room with eyes that don't seem to be seeing. Izuku does his best not to outwardly react to his friend's sudden willingness to be in proximity to him and Uraraka again, but he does lock eyes with Uraraka as Todoroki takes a seat on the couch they're not occupying, and the look in her eyes mirrors what he knows to be in his own. Tentative hope and excitement tempered with a little anxiety over the unexplained change in behavior. Maybe Uraraka doesn't love Todoroki the same way Izuku does, but she does love him as a friend, and they've both been concerned. Ida too, but he's a little more stoic when it comes to emotional matters like this, and has internalized all his worry over Todoroki, whereas Izuku and Uraraka seem to need a daily 10-minute minimum outlet period to blurt out all their concerns and theories and commiserate with one another in order to cope with the unexpected freeze-out from him. Something must change in Izuku's expression because Uraraka's warm, brown eyes melt into pools of sympathy. She knows how Izuku feels about their friend. She's the only one that knows Izuku would have, ideally, liked to be more than just Todoroki's friend. Even before the sudden freeze-out, though, Izuku never believed it would happen. What would someone as wonderful and strong and special as Todoroki want with a plain nobody with a borrowed quirk like Izuku? No, the most he'll ever get from Todoroki is friendship, and Izuku's okay with that. But only if he has the friendship. Without any interaction or real relationship with him, Izuku's been sinking further and further into the hole of self-pity that he really thought he'd clawed his way out of for good some time after his clash with Kacchan that mended their relationship just enough for them to be rivals instead of outright enemies on ground beta. He hasn't particularly enjoyed being swallowed by feelings of inadequacy, rejection, and worthlessness, but he can't seem to shake it off. All he's ever done is be the best friend he can to Todoroki, and Uraraka assures him he's kept his romantic feelings hidden shockingly well for someone who wears his heart on his sleeve. So the only reason he can think up to explain Todoroki's sudden decision not to interact with him is that Todoroki's finally realized how much better he can do than Izuku for a friend. A weak, whiny voice, it sounds like, middle school Izuku pipes up in his head. He knows how useless you are. He knows why Kacchan named you Deku. He wants nothing to do with you. He wants to distance from you so badly he's distancing himself from Uraraka and Ida too. You're dragging them down with you. Izuku barely has the confidence to disagree with his inner voice at this point. I broke up with Awase. Startled by Todoroki's voice, Izuku jolts, sharing a look of utter confusion and helplessness with Uraraka, before turning his attention to Todoroki fully. He clears his throat awkwardly. You did, why? And are you all right? Todoroki lifts his eyes from his cup of tea and stares at Izuku in silence for so long that Izuku begins to worry his friend has been hit by a quirk misfire, something that prevents him from answering questions, and he's just about to try and rephrase his question without it sounding like one to get around it when Todoroki finally answers him. I realized that when he tells me I did a good job on a quiz, or that it sounds like I did well in training, it's no different to the way he sounds with the word he uses to congratulate his friends for the same thing. I realized that he didn't see my accomplishments, or me, as special. Uraraka makes a wounded sound. What made you realize that, Todoroki? She asks in a soft, tentative voice, as if she's trying to coax an abandoned kitten into trusting her. Todoroki's answer stuns Izuku. I just compared it to some other things that have made me feel special and asked him about it. He said that if I wanted to catch up to everyone and be normal, I had to stop expecting people to marvel at me for normal things, that I couldn't expect everything I did to be seen as special. Immediately, Izuku is indignant, righteously furious. By default, everything Todoroki does is special because Todoroki is special. Izuku marvels at how much strength of character and heart Todoroki possesses on a daily basis. He uses Todoroki's ability to clamber over personal hurdles as his inspiration to make himself do the same, looking to the way he reconnected with his mother and learned to accept his flames as his own instead of his father's, as examples of someone who can adapt and grow in the name of being a better person, because being a better person means being a better hero, and secretly, Izuku doesn't look at Kacchan as a symbol of victory anymore. He looks at Todoroki because Kacchan only knows how to win on the battlefield while Todoroki refuses to concede defeat in any area. Todoroki attacks his personal problems and trauma with as much ferocity as he does a villain on the street, refusing to give up until he's made an improvement upon himself and his mental health, clawing and snarling until he's won some ground against the things that hold him back as a person. That's victory in Izuku's eyes. For Awazi to have said that to Todoroki must mean the boy has suffered a traumatic head wound, resulting in an inability to grasp reality properly. That's the only viable explanation for it, as far as Izuku's concerned. He can't say that to Todoroki, though. It would give away his feelings far too easily, even to someone who's still developing their understanding of subtext and conversational nuance. Instead, he gives the most honest response he can think of, while still dodging his personal stake in the matter. You deserve someone who thinks everything you do is special, Todoroki, he says firmly, refusing to look away despite the inclination to, when Todoroki's mismatched eyes meet his own with a strange, unfamiliar intensity. I agree, Uraraka states resolutely, fist clenched on her lap. Awazi's a fool if he thinks it's normal to see your partner as average. The whole point of a relationship is that you think more of the person. That's just falling in love 101. She punctuates her statement with a decisive head nod. Todoroki doesn't look at her or acknowledge what she says, though. He's still staring at Izuku, the two of them locked into an unspoken staring contest that doesn't seem to end. even when they blink. It takes Shouto some time to get over what happened with Awase. Initially, he's in a bit of a daze over it. After all, he hardly expected to voice his feelings and find out that Awase had essentially been humoring him like some child that couldn't handle the reality of the situation. The other boy wasn't mean about it. He wasn't cruel or nasty. He just stated it just passionately, like he was explaining a confirmed fact to Shouto. In a way, that's why it takes Shouto about a week to shake the conversation off. He's used to the things that hurt him being said in a loud, booming voice full of anger and bile, so processing that things can still sting, like the equivalent of vinegar being poured into an open wound, when they're said in a calm, casual tone, requires some mental acrobatics to understand. But he does, eventually, process it and move on to cataloging how he feels in the aftermath. As much as he's sad, he certainly doesn't feel heartbroken. Whenever he reads about breakups in books or the shoujo manga Midoriya and Uraraka like, or sees them on drama shows Ashido watches in the common room, they're depicted as being a lot more all-encompassing than Shouto's breakup with Awase. Really, he doesn't feel like he's lost anything more than someone who was becoming a new but potentially important friend. Awase is an attractive boy with a lot of heroic potential, but Shouto isn't mourning a future he never got to have. He's not holding back tears as he pictures the important moments he and Awase never progressed to, like first kisses or saying they loved each other for the first time or moving in together. In fact, he's certain he felt more torn up over avoiding Midoriya than he does over the breakup with Awase. He's only guessing, but he's fairly certain the void in his chest, the one that's already healing over now that he sees his best friend every day, like he used to, came from Midoriya's absence. It makes sense, even if Shouto doesn't really understand the distinction between seeing less of his friend and losing his boyfriend. Logically, the latter's supposed to hurt more than the former. He knows that much. So, Shouto does the only thing he can think of that might help him make sense of the confusing priorities his heart seems to have. He decides to ask his mother about it during his weekly visit to her in the hospital. I can't tell you how you feel, Shouto, because only you can know that with certainty, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say your feelings for Midoriya outweigh whatever feelings you had for Awase, his mother tells him gently. Shouto blinks at her in confusion until she takes pity on him and elaborates further. Shouto, sweetheart, I really am only guessing and using whatever mother's intuition I have despite our previous estrangement, but I think deep down, Midoriya might be a little more than a friend to you. You said that the cold feeling started the first time he frowned at you, didn't you? Shouto nods, firmly. He's confused, but he knows that much is true. The gaping ice pit in his chest opened on the joint training exercise day when Midoriya frowned at him talking to Awase. His mother smiles. Well, you didn't have any distance from him at that point, did you? So it couldn't have been solely because the two of you drifted apart. Sounds to me like it started because, for the first time in your friendship with him, Midoriya seemed unhappy with you, and that upset you. She pauses and peers at Shouto in thought for a moment before continuing. You said that the problem with Awase was that his praise and compliments were generic, the same that he'd give to any friend, and that he thought you shouldn't expect him to see you as special, right? Shouto nods again, and his mother leans across the small distance between her bed and the chair Shouto perches on every weekend to squeeze his hand. What you should figure out, Shouto, is whether Midoriya's praise and compliments feel more than generic. It might tell you why you missed him more than Awase, if they do, at least. And perhaps, she adds with a slightly coy grin, you should think about whether you maybe see Midoriya as more special than you did Awase, or anyone else for that matter. Shouto leaves the hospital that weekend with more questions than answers, and an unwavering determination to find those answers sooner rather than later. If what his mother is insinuating is true, then he has an apology and a somewhat scary confession to make. Assuming, that is, that he hasn't misconstrued her words terribly and she was trying to hint that Shouto might care about Midoriya as more than a friend, in a rather non-platonic sense. He shakes his head. He doesn't know how to answer that question yet, but he does know that it's the right question, at least. A smile tugs at the corners of his lips. At the start of the school year, when conversing with anyone but his father felt foreign and confusing, he definitely wouldn't have been able to infer his mother's meaning quite so easily. It's a sure sign of his progress towards becoming more socially aware and catching up with his peers when it comes to conversational subtleties. He can't wait to tell Midoriya, he thinks to himself as he begins his walk back to UA campus, brain refusing to connect the dots between the question he's resolved to answer and his immediate response to do something he's proud of and excited by. The answer comes when Shouto least expects it. The class is hanging out in the common room on Sunday evening, doing nothing in particular, music in the background with snacks on the center coffee table, and people strewn about the room haphazardly. Shouto in particular is sitting on the floor in front of Midoriya, who's perched on the couch behind him and engaged in a conversation with Bakugo about something. Shouto's not really listening. He's not even really on the same plane of existence as his classmates, in fact, because Midoriya's hand is placed lightly on the top of his head, nails scratching back and forth gently, and it's a struggle for Shouto not to purr and melt into the floor like liquefied butter from how good it feels. No one but his mother has touched his hair in a long time, mostly because overall, Shouto doesn't exactly roll out the red carpet and throw down a welcome mat for other people's hands, doesn't give off the kind of vibe, as Ashido would say, that he wants to be touched, and that's because he doesn't. Touch doesn't have a positive association in Shouto's mind. Physical touch is attached to pain and unmeetable expectations and curling in on himself while he throws up after getting hit in the stomach during training. So logically, Shouto does not like to be touched. Except by Midoriya. He's only just realizing it right now, sitting on the carpet and trying not to butt his head further into Midoriya's palm like a demanding house cat. Midoriya Izuku's hands and touch have never triggered that negative association. Midoriya's hands coming towards him have never made him want to flinch away, only lean closer. Outside of training, that is. Shouto is very proud to announce that he has healthier expectations of how much his muscles should ache and burn after training now, and how it feels to be worked with instead of victimized. Thanks to his classmates and teachers, so during practical heroism exercises he's fine. It's when the lesson is finished and his thoughts aren't occupied with next moves and counterattacks and trying to develop strategies on the fly that the flinching comes back, or at least the urge to flinch. He's very good at suppressing them before anyone can see, or even worse, ask. But from the sports festival onwards, not once has his flight response been triggered by Midoriya's hands coming towards him. And why would it have been? Midoriya represents Shouto's freedom. Midoriya is the reason Shouto gets more and more of his mental real estate back from his old man by the day. The person who taught him everything that he is belongs to him and no one else. He's just never stopped and thought about it, but it's impossible not to with Midoriya stroking his hair and scraping his neatly trimmed nails over Shouto's scalp, filling Shouto with a kind of contentment and comfort and safety he's never felt before. How could he have not noticed it sooner? How didn't he see that Midoriya is different in his eyes, the exception to all Shouto's rules? Blinking back to the present, he gives in to the urge to push his head into Midoriya's palm more firmly, the weight of it grounding him. When Midoriya rolls with it, immediately making his touch a little more deliberate and solid, it makes Shouto's mind up for him. His mother was absolutely correct when she said Midoriya was more than a friend to Shouto. Much, much more, in fact. Now all Shouto has to do is tell him. Yeah, I'm definitely glad the classes are over, Shouto says, nodding. The class is finished, gushing about the impromptu villain takedown he and Bakugo executed on their way home from the final supplemental class, putting their freshly minted professional licenses to good use, and now he's left talking to just Midoriya and Tsuyu, a few other classmates gathered around Bakugo across the room, likely discussing the same thing. They didn't sound all bad, though, Midoriya says. When you talked about that lesson with the misbehaving kids, you sounded like you really enjoyed that one in the end. Tsuyu ribbits her agreement. That's true, Shouto says with a small smile. He really did like that one lesson. It felt good to make those kids happy, and even better to use his quirk for nothing but fun and games for possibly the first time ever. I think I did well that day. It's taken a lot of time and convincing from his friends, but Shouto understands that perfection isn't necessary to be proud of his achievements now. Previously, he would have counted the fact that he had to work with others to win those kids' hearts as a failure, but he sees clearly now that isn't the case. Did well? Midoriya repeats incredulously, eyes wide. Todoroki, you had never used your quirk for anything but fighting and training to fight before then, and from what All Might told me, you basically created a whole theme park-worthy slide around randomly placed quirk items on the fly. That's incredible. You're incredible. Shouto blinks rapidly as his heart rattles around his ribcage, the full force of Midoriya's earnest praise slamming into it like a hurricane. It's making something well up in him, something warm and all-consuming. There's nothing he wants more than to wrap himself around Midoriya like one of Shiozaki's vines, and it catches him off guard. He certainly never wanted to be close to anyone before, never mind that close. I love you, he blurts out. There's a long pause of silence while his rationale catches up to his mouth and heart, and then Tsuyu clears her throat awkwardly, making Shouto wince. In his impulsivity, he had forgotten she was there. I think I'll go see how Chaco's doing with our English homework, she says, standing up and shooting Shouto a look that he thinks is supposed to convey some kind of support, which he appreciates. Once her quiet footsteps have faded from earshot, Shouto forces himself to look at his friend properly. Midoriya's jaw is slack, mouth parted, and his cheeks are bright raspberry red. His vibrant green eyes are large and intense, tears gathering on the lower lash line, and his hands are white-knuckled in his lap. Licking his lips nervously, Shouto decides to try again. Midoriya doesn't seem to be reacting badly, so there's still hope for him to reciprocate Shouto's feelings, and maybe explaining a little more will help things along in that direction. He knows he always feels better the more details and clarity he has on things. "I'm sorry for springing it on you like this," he says, frowning slightly. "Honestly, I only just realized it myself, but I do. You're my best friend, but you're also a lot more than that, Midoriya. You're my inspiration to be the best hero I can be. You're the person who pushes me to try new things and step out of my comfort zone. You're the reason I have friends at all, and why I learned to accept myself the way I am. Without you, I wouldn't have learned that my resentment towards my old man was holding me back, and I wouldn't have my mother in my life again." Shouto swallows hard, realizing he's rambling, but unable to collar the instinct to keep pouring his feelings out. There are just so many of them, and now that the floodgates are open, there's no stopping them from flowing out of his mouth. He just wants Midori to understand how much he means to him, how essential he's become to Shoto's continued happiness. "When I distanced myself from you, I felt so empty, and I didn't know why at first. And I'm really sorry I did that," he adds when Midori's face twists a little in pain. "You frowned at me when I was talking to Awase after the joint training exercise, and it made me so sad because you had never frowned at me before. And I foolishly thought that avoiding you would stop me feeling bad about it. I realize now that something must have been going on that was upsetting you, but it felt like you were upset at me at the time, and I didn't want to constantly feel like I'd upset you when that made me even sadder. It was selfish, and it's no excuse, but that's what happened. And I missed you so much, and I can't believe I was so stupid to not realize that I felt this way about you when I had such a strong reaction to even the illusion I had hurt you." He clenches his fists, letting his nails bite into his palms as he grits his teeth. Saying it out loud, Shouto can't help but expect his friend's opinion of him to sour now that he knows how selfish and blind Shouto has been. But instead of looking at him with disappointment, Shouto finds Midoriya's eyes burning with cautious hope, the echo of the start of a smile curving the left side of his lips upwards. "You love me, as more than a friend." Midoriya's voice is a low rasp as he speaks, and Shouto nods immediately, letting his determination and seriousness shine in his eyes. Midoriya nibbles on his lower lip, pulling Shoto's gaze to the area. A brief, irrational feeling of jealousy sweeps through him, wanting it to be his teeth sinking into the soft pink flesh. "I was upset with you," Midoriya tells him, while Shouto watches his lips form the words. It takes his brain a moment to comprehend the actual meaning before he blinks, heart sinking. "You were? Why?" Midoriya's front teeth bite into his bottom lip harder, and Shouto can't seem to pull his damn eyes away. "Because I'm in love with you, and it was obvious you wanted Awase, that you didn't feel the same way." The rough, quiet words do the trick and force Shoto's eyes to flick up to meet Midoriya's, finding them shadowed with pain. It makes his heart crack because he put that pain there. In his inability to understand his own feelings for Midoriya, he caused that look of hurt. "I did," he whispers. "I just didn't know it yet. I was naive and I thought Awase's praise meant more because he isn't a classmate, and he went out of his way to give it to me." He sighs shakily. "I knew even before we broke up that it didn't, or at least that it didn't mean as much as yours. But I tried to reason that away because I didn't want to have made a mistake by dating him and distancing myself from you. If I'd made that mistake, it meant I'd been a bad friend to the person I cared most about for no reason." To Shoto's surprise, Midori's lips curl into a beautiful, genuine smile. "You're so good at understanding this stuff now, Todoroki," Midoriya tells him. "You definitely wouldn't have known all that about your feelings at the start of the school year." Shoto's heart flutters almost violently. Midoriya gets it. Gets him. Midoriya thinks he's special. He sees Shoto's achievements as something instead of par for the course progress that doesn't warrant acknowledgement. "So you're in love with me," he says slowly. "And I'm in love with you." Midoriya's cheeks, which had calmed down to a pale powder pink, flush into a brighter hue once more as he nods. Shouto hums thoughtfully before he gets up and moves to sit right next to his friend on the couch, thigh to thigh. Now that he knows how Midoriya feels about him, it's much easier to apply his usual assured confidence to the situation. "Midoriya," he starts, but his friend cuts him off. "I think you can call me Izuku after all. That," he says, waving a hand in the direction of the chair Shouto was previously sitting on. Izuku's nervous but tentatively happy energy is so endearing that Shouto can't help but smile at him. "Then you can call me Shouto," he accepts before continuing with what he was about to say. Izuku, I'm going to kiss you now. Izuku makes a noise somewhere between a longing whine and a surprised squeak as he nods frantically, and Shouto hides his uncharacteristically toothy smile by leaning in until the tip of his nose is brushing Izuku's, pausing for a heavy second to give Izuku one last chance to back out or reject him. When nothing happens except for the audible hitch of Izuku's breath, Shouto closes the last of the distance between them and presses his lips to Izuku's. They're soft, so damn soft, and they're warm as they mold to Shouto's and press back, hesitantly at first. But then Shouto places one hand on Izuku's cheek, and the other on the back of his neck, and Izuku gets more confident, leaning into Shoto's palm and deepening the kiss. Shouto sighs into it, desperately glad he didn't give his first kiss to Awase or anyone else but Izuku. He focuses on the supple give of Izuku's lips beneath his, on the faint taste of green tea lingering on them, and the absolute security he feels when Izuku finally gets brave enough to wrap his arms around Shoto's waist, and time ceases to exist or matter. It's only later, when he's curled into Izuku's side like a sated and sleepy kitten, that he realizes he completely missed the comment his new boyfriend made about All Might giving him private updates on how the remedial classes were going. He smirks. All Might is totally his future father-in-law. All right, listeners, this concludes the fic Jadeite. I really like this one shot a lot. I really enjoy this one because I think it's really great. It's mostly from Shoto's perspective, and you get a little bit of POVs for Izuku too, but I really like that it touches on some of the struggles Shouto has with social situations and things and his development over time and how he's grown with being friends with Izuku. So I really like how the author put this in that perspective. I'm eager to hear your thoughts and reactions to this fic as well. If you like the fic and you have an opportunity to slide over to AO3 to leave comments or kudos to the original author, feel free to do so. I'm sure it's much appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.